Right, let's move on to another story, which is actually quite a big story. We've been talking on this show. We've almost sort of predicted something here. We've been saying that one of the big stories of this year is going to be a shortage of aircraft, basically getting hold of new ones. And this essentially is a hangover from COVID and supply chain problems of perhaps people in the industry. Too many people taking early retirement, too many people leaving. Obviously, you've had a war in Ukraine, you've got trouble in the Middle East. All of these things add to prices, add to shortage of equipment, etc. That's meant now that airlines are going to struggle to get hold of new aircraft. This is particularly a problem in Australia because we basically have a very old fleet of Qantas and Virgin. We are still running on the kind of old generation 737s when the rest of the world moved on an awful lot.
And A330s and things like that.
So you've got Qantas now and Virgin kind of scrambling to get these orders in, having to fight against other airlines. And the irony is during COVID, being able to buy an aircraft or lease an aircraft was dirt cheap because you have the balance of power. Now it's going to become more and more difficult. And as Australia faces this shortage, it's going to be more and more difficult to get the planes they need. We had an announcement from Virgin earlier this week. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so this was not so much an announcement as kind of acknowledgement that Virgin, we're all aware of the recent difficulties at Boeing, which, started up again after the blowout of the Alaska Airlines emergency exit door on the emergency exit door plug on the 737 MAX 9 over Portland. The FAA has sort of barred Boeing from expanding its MAX production, at least for the time being. And, all these troubles at Boeing have had the knock-on effect that Virgin Australia, which has an order of, quite a few of the 737 MAX family, so it's got 10 more Maxes on order, with 10 more Max 8s on order and 25 Max 10s. These Max 8s were all supposed to arrive by the end of this year, with the Max 10s to start arriving from 2025. But the Max 10 still hasn't been certified in the US by the FAA. And now, as well, because of all these troubles at Boeing, Virgin has basically been forced to admit that it's not going to get all of its Max 8s by the end of the year. It's expecting only 4 more Max 8s from its order of 14, meaning the remaining 6 will start arriving from early next year. Meanwhile, the Max 10s, which were supposed to arrive starting next year, will now not arrive until 2026 at the earliest.
So there's a few issues with this. Obviously, firstly, you want to get in new aircraft because the older an aircraft gets, the more maintenance it takes. Just like with a car, people say, how long does an aircraft last? Well, as long as you want. But the older it gets, the more you've got to patch it up, the more checks it's got to go through, etc., etc.
It's also less fuel efficient.
Exactly.
It's noisier.
Well, yeah, this is it. We'll get into that. Eh? Right? So, yes, the first thing is it's more fuel efficient. So, 20% or so more fuel efficient than the older generation ones. So obviously you effectively as an airline can make more money on that. But if you have got an order in for this many aircraft, if you're doing your forward projections financially, not getting these aircraft in is going to cost you more money in the long run. It's also important for Virgin because basically, post-COVID, they've effectively stopped being a traditional international airline. But having the MAX, which has a slightly longer range, does enable Virgin to start to and to expand on kind of limited. They're kind of like the shortest of long-haul routes, but it does stop them really getting back into limited operations or makes it an awful lot harder for them. So the longer it takes these aircraft to arrive, the more problems they're going to have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Virgin Australia right now, aside from the 4 737 MAX 8s that it now has, it received its 4th MAX 8 VH8ID on the 13th of March. It has 4 MAX 8s. Basically, the rest of its fleet is 737-800s. There's, for VARA, there's a couple of 700s and like a couple of A320s, and, those old Fokker 100s that are still flying out west for, VARA. But the rest of it is basically all 737-800s. And, you order the 737 MAX 8 because it's basically the 737-800 again. That's why you would order, there's not a lot more training needed. The 737-800 is a popular design. And so it's, again, it's just the same plane again, but a little bit more this time. And so Virgin has basically gone to an all 737 fleet. It's just the one aircraft type. Again, barring those couple out in Western Australia for VARA. And so if you're running just all 737s, you want to have a bunch of reliable 737s. And if you're looking to replace your older 737s, then when the new 737s get delayed, as you say, Adam, you're stuck using the older ones for a little while longer.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it might sound obvious when you explain it, but if you say, for example, are a pilot, it's not the case that you can fly a 737 and then the next week just jump into another aircraft type. Obviously, you have a whole series of training and licenses and qualifications you have to get. Same for all sectors that work there. So one of the ways that Virgin believed they could be more efficient and cost effective was to move to everything being a 737 fleet. That is part of the reason why, unlike Qantas, they didn't move into buying Airbus aircraft.
Or Dreamliners.
Dreamliners, exactly. So they decided the best thing is purely to be willing with Boeing. Now they have been punished for that. So if you're Boeing, you're going to be quite red-faced. Virgin will be quite upset about this. So that is, another issue they're going to face.
And this is after Virgin increased its order of the 737 MAX 8.
Yes.
Because in November, it was originally just supposed to get 8 MAX 8s. Now it's got 14 on order. So Virgin has, put more of its chips into Boeing. And is basically being whacked for that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, we don't know exactly what commercial discussions would have happened when they signed the deal to get these Maxes. But without a doubt, if you're Jane Helicker and you're flying over doing this deal, she would have asked the question: are you absolutely certain that these things are going to arrive on time? And they would have been reassured, absolutely no problem at all. But the problem is Boeing potentially weren't to know of all the problems they've had earlier this year, alongside all of the issues from COVID. So now they've been left very red-faced. It's a very difficult problem. And
in the latest issue of the Australian Aviation Magazine, you can see a bit of analysis on the Boeing situation, particularly surrounding the MAX. I spoke to a professor at, I believe, RMIT. I'd have to go back and check. It's been a while, and it's been a long day, Adam. And I'm
it has
tired.
been a long day.
But I spoke to a very astute professor who kind of took us through what the challenges Boeing is facing now with the 737 MAX. Can people have confidence in Boeing? What can Boeing do to dig itself out of this hole? And so check that out in the latest issue of Australian Aviation Magazine, where you will also find an opinion piece from me about the Boeing situation, where I give my opinion of exactly what's wrong with Boeing and how they can fix it.
Maybe the magazine will also be called the Jake Nelson Experience next issue as well. You know, like how Taylor Swift will have like a Taylor Swift magazine.
Yeah.
It's just the Jake Nelson Experience.
What would my Eras tour look like, Adam?
I don't know. Probably I would say slightly smaller venues.
Probably, yes.
Slightly smaller venues. Yeah. And then, you can build up from there.
By the way, just briefly on the subject of Virgin Australia Regional Airlines, we haven't touched on this before, but VARA is looking to replace its remaining 4 Fokker F100s, which are about 30 years old by now. It's kept those on to land at smaller regional airports that, can't handle a 737-700, which is what it's been using now in place of most of its former F100 fleet. Virgin is looking to retire those 4 remaining F100s and replace them with either the Airbus A220-100 or the Embraer E190E2, which is the successor to the original E190E jet. The E190E2 possibly got a little bit of a leg up this month when Embraer announced that it has received 120-minute ETOPS approval, which will basically allow it to fly longer, more direct, non-limiting routes over water and other remote areas. So we don't see that. I think there's only one E2 currently active in Australia. That's with Pioneer.
That is a great knowledge. I've got to say, I know it is the Jake Nelson experience, but that is what you get from Jake Nelson. Jokes and detail, attention to detail. I love that.
It's what I do, Adam. I pun and I know things. But yes, there's I think only one E2 that's currently in use in Australia, though Pioneer might be looking to get rid of that one. But it's the E2 and the A220 are sort of the main options for Virgin at the moment for replacing those Fokker F100s. And so it's. Now that the E2 has been given this extra approval, that is probably going to make it it's probably going to raise its standing in the stakes between it and the A220. From what I've been reading, the E2 I think doesn't have as much range perhaps as the A220-100. But it's a very comfortable experience, and I believe the quietest aircraft of its type in the skies at the moment.